If you look at what terrifies you forthrightly enough, then you discover the spirit of your ancestors that you could become.
Well, the thing is that young men need a gang. The question is what the gang is going to be. You know, and it can be the local gang that isn't structured very well and that is getting into trouble all the time, or it can be a higher order gang that's associated with some long-term disciplined vision. And so, I mean, everybody needs a community, and it's important for young people to learn how to interact with each other at a social level. And that's either going to be structured properly and intelligently towards some high order goal, or it's going to be kind of chaotic and violent. But there's no getting away from it. I mean, the necessity for it.
We're not very happy about young men joining gangs, but actually, here's what's interesting. It's like, it's one thing to join a gang, and maybe that's not the best thing, but it's another thing not to be able to join a gang. You see, that's really a bad thing. Because it means if you're 12 or 13 and you can't find a gang, that means that you haven't become socialized enough so that people will accept you. And so joining a gang, being able to join a gang, is actually a marker of a certain degree of maturation, you know, and you need a gang if you need a gang if you're male, let's say. And maybe you need a gang if you're female too, although we don't seem to see roving gangs of females. So, well, right, I mean, that's not something that happens, right? And I would say that's actually worthy of note. There's a reason for that. I think it might have something to do with the fact that because women mature sexually earlier than men, that, you know, girls 13, 14 start going out with guys that are older than that, or maybe 14, 15. They start going out with older guys, and so they don't have that time where they aggregate together in, as I said, roving bands of teenage girls, whereas younger guys, 14, 15, 16, they're not necessarily that attractive as potential mates, and so they have to do something with their time, and maybe what they do is second best and hang around with other losers like them, whatever. I think there's more to it than that. I think that joining a gang is actually a stepping stone to full adult socialization, right? Because what you have to do is move away from your primary dependence on your parents and into a peer group, and then you have to learn how to interact with the peer group in a manner that makes you a desirable part of that group and maybe a respectable part, and then you also have to be able to hold your own in that peer group, right? Because a male gang has a fair bit of contentiousness in it. There's a lot of poking and prodding that goes on, often in humorous guise, to see if you can, well, can you take a joke, you know? Can you take some hassle? Are you good for something? Are you at least, you know, or are you someone that can be relied on? Are you honest? Are you someone that could be talked to? Can you be relied on in a scrap if necessary? You know, can you take a blow in your life, or even an actual blow, without falling apart as a consequence? All that testing goes on, and that's all necessary. It's part of, see, because I think the way that human beings develop is that, well, first of all, they're children and they're dependent, and they have their childhood friends and so forth, but fundamentally they're within the confines of the familial group. And maybe that's even a matriarchal organization, that initial familial group. Maybe it's not, but maybe it is. Anyways, you're certainly under the primary care of your mother and your father. And if you have only a single parent, and many of these young men did, that's often the mother, and so primarily you're under the care of your mother. And that's fine, except you just don't want that to be the case for your whole damn life, right? I mean, at some point, enough of that. And really that point's got to be somewhere around 12, 13, where, you know, you move out into the world despite the fact that you don't know what the hell you're doing, and you take your risks and you take your blows and you meet your mates and you join a gang. And then, of course, the fundamental question is, well, what sort of gang is it going to be? That's really the fundamental question, not whether or not it's going to be a gang, is what sort of gang is it going to be?
There's always kind of a beta male guy who's being real friendly and always failing miserably with the women because basically he's lying to himself and to them. He's a persona, and a persona is the face that you show to the world when you're trying to pretend and to convince yourself and others that you're, I would say, harmless, but we could say a good person. But a good person isn't harmless. A good person is capable of, well, maybe a good person is capable of anything, but is willing to hold that in abeyance. I read this interesting commentary a little while ago on a statement by Christ in the New Testament, and the statement generally interpreted is that the meek shall inherit the earth, but I was looking up the multiple translations of the word meek, and meek is actually derived from a Greek word, of course, because the Bible, at least some of the original forms of the Bible, were in Greek. And that word didn't exactly mean meek. It meant something like those who have weapons and the ability to use them, but determined to keep them sheathed, will inherit the world. And that means that people who are capable of force, let's say, but decide not to use it, are in the proper moral position. And Nietzsche commented on that a fair bit too. You know, he thought of most morality as cowardice, not because morality itself was cowardice, but because most people who are cowards disguise their cowardice as morality, and they claim that their harmlessness, which is actually a consequence of their fear and inability to be harmful, say, or to be dangerous, is actually a sign of their moral integrity. And that's a really bad idea. So, you know, if you're an axe murderer but you don't have an axe, that doesn't mean that you're moral. So now, with regards to, so that's the persona. And the persona is the mask that you wear, and that's what persona means, is the mask that you wear to convince yourself and the world that you're not a terrible monster, so that when you look at yourself in the mirror, you don't have to run away screaming. So, but the practical approach for developing your shadow, I would say, is to contemplate and consider your resentment and notice what it says. And because your resentment will also tell you what you have to say. You know, so look at what happened at Google this weekend. You know, James Damore wrote that memo, and you can imagine he was pretty angry and perhaps even somewhat resentful at having to attend that diversity seminar. And I'm really just using this as an example. But what he did was decide that that meant that he had something that he had to say, and then look at the consequences of that, man. It's absolutely unbelievable. And so, you know, if you're feeling oppressed at work, or you're oppressed in your life, or you know, or you're oppressing yourself, then you got to notice that you're feeling oppressed. Then you have to notice that you're feeling resentful and angry and bitter, and maybe even like Cain in the story of Cain and Abel, because Cain is sort of the archetypal bitter man. And then you have to decide what it is that you need to do in order to remove from yourself that bitterness, and that usually means that there's something that you have to say. And then you have to say it because your soul depends on it. And not only does your soul depend on it, I would say the fate of the world depends on it, because you know, you might be wrong, and then you should be straightened out. Maybe you're just being whiny and you have to talk to somebody about that. But it may be that you're actually detecting something wrong, some tyranny that's directed towards you and other people, and it's like your moral obligation to speak up about it. And so many workplaces become toxic, to use a terrible cliche, because the people in them won't speak up for what they actually want, or they speak up too late, and then they're all twisted up about it, and you know, they're torturing other people because they're so unhappy, and so forth and so on. So practical approach for developing your shadow fundamentally is radical honesty. What really happens to children as they become socialized isn't that they inhibit in the Freudian sense. He was wrong about that. You don't inhibit your aggression. You don't inhibit your playfulness, not optimally. You integrate them. And you integrate them into something approximating a game. And that's the brilliant, what would you say? That's the brilliant innovation of Jean Piaget, the developmental psychologist, who, you know, he knew the Freudian corpus, but his theory is better. It's not inhibition, it's integration. And so, like, if you have an aggressive child at the age of 2, because a number of children are quite aggressive at the age of 2, it's part of their temperament. Most of them are socialized by the age of 4. And what that means is they learn how to play with others. And then their aggression is integrated. You know, like a great athlete, it's like a great athlete is a competitive person. That aggression is driving them forward, like it's a primordial moving force. But it's not haphazard and scattered, like it's disciplined and focused, and it's become...
Sublimated, maybe, is the...
No, it's integrated is the right thing. It's like, it's...
So you harness it to something useful?
Yes, that's right. It starts to act in the service of a higher order. Well, if you look long enough into an abyss, then you discover something at the bottom of it, and what you discover at the bottom of it is your dead father. And what that means is that if you look at what terrifies you forthrightly enough, then you discover the spirit of your ancestors that you could become. And that won't be called out of you without that courageous confrontation. Because nothing is called out of you without it being demanded. It's the same as working out in a gym. You lift heavy weights, not so heavy that they hurt you, but heavy enough so that they're slightly beyond your capacity to grasp. Nothing is compelled out of you without necessity. And so then you ask, well, what if you subject yourself to the highest possible level of necessity? Maybe then the possibility is that the best there is called forth out of you. And that's a union with what's greatest about humanity in the past, because that's in you. But it's not going to come out without compulsion, and the compulsion that you set upon yourself. And so that's the antidote to the collectivist viewpoint. It's like, it's your problem, and thank God for that. Because you need a problem to justify your miserable existence. And it has to be a problem of sufficient magnitude so that you can look yourself in the mirror when you wake up in the morning and you can think, well, despite my inadequacy and all the things about me that are insufficient, at least I'm bearing up under this worthwhile load. And that's a start. So,
thank you.